The setting sun cast long shadows across the pristine marble floors of the Hassan mansion, its golden rays filtering through floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the sprawling estate in Beverly Hills. Karim Hassan stood before his reflection in the master bedroom's mirror, adjusting his custom-made Tom Ford suit with practiced precision. At 32, he embodied success. Heir to the Hassan International Group, a Fortune 500 company specializing in sustainable energy solutions, and engaged to Madison Taylor, a woman whose beauty matched her social standing. The benefit gala starts in an hour, Habibi, Madison called from the doorway, her voice carrying the practiced sweetness she reserved for public occasions. She glided into the room, a vision in a crimson designer gown that highlighted her statuesque figure. The foundation's donors will be expecting us to make an entrance. Karim turned to face his fiancée, taking in her perfectly styled blonde hair and flawlessly applied makeup. Something tugged at his conscience, a subtle disconnect between the Madison he'd fallen in love with 3 years ago and the woman who stood before him now. He pushed the thought aside, attributing it to pre-wedding jitters. Their engagement party was scheduled for the following month, and the society pages couldn't stop buzzing about what they called the wedding of the decade. "We'll make it on time," he assured her, reaching for his favorite watch, a vintage piece his father had given him before retiring to Dubai. The drive to the Beverly Wilshire takes 15 minutes. Madison's perfectly manicured fingers traced patterns on his chest. "I still think we should have taken the helicopter. It would make quite the impression." "Some things are worth more than impressions, Habibti," he replied, using the Arabic term of endearment that usually made her smile. This time, he noticed her slight grimace at the foreign word. "My father always taught me that true respect comes from actions, not appearances." The drive started peacefully enough. Karim's Rolls-Royce Phantom glided through the exclusive neighborhoods of Beverly Hills, its interior a cocoon of luxury and quiet. Madison scrolled through her phone, occasionally showing him social media posts about the gala. He nodded politely, his mind wandering to the upcoming board meeting, where he would present his vision for expanding the company's solar energy division. The first drops of rain began to fall as they merged onto Sunset Boulevard. Madison wrinkled her nose, concerned about her hair. "The weather report said clear skies," she complained, checking her makeup in the vanity mirror. Karim was about to respond when headlights suddenly flooded the car's interior. A pickup truck had swerved into their lane, its tires losing traction, on the increasingly slick road. Time seemed to slow down as Karim processed the situation. Madison's scream pierced the air. In that split second, Karim made a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. He turned the wheel sharply, positioning his side of the car toward the oncoming vehicle to shield Madison from impact. The world spun in a blur of lights and sound. The last thing Karim remembered was the sickening crunch of metal and Madison's horrified face illuminated by breaking glass. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. The sterile white ceiling of Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, the beeping of monitors, the hushed voices of doctors, the devastating news delivered in careful, measured tones. "Mr. Hassan, the injury to your spinal cord, significant trauma, paralysis from the waist down." The words washed over him like waves, each one pulling him further into an abyss of despair. Madison sat in a corner of the hospital room, her designer dress replaced by casual luxury wear, her face a mask of concern. But something in her eyes had changed, or perhaps he was only now seeing what had always been there. "The doctors say you'll need extensive rehabilitation," she said, her voice tight with an emotion he couldn't quite identify. "We'll need to postpone the engagement party, of course, and the wedding. Well, we should wait and see how your recovery progresses." Karim stared at the ceiling, his father's words echoing in his mind. In times of hardship, a man's true character is revealed, and so is the character of those around him. He had always thought he understood what that meant. Now, watching Madison's carefully maintained facade crack under the weight of their new reality, he was beginning to truly comprehend his father's wisdom. The following weeks brought a parade of specialists, each offering different approaches to rehabilitation. but it was the subtle changes in Madison's behavior that truly marked the passage of time. Her visits grew shorter, her excuses more elaborate. The woman who had once promised to love him forever now couldn't seem to look him in the eye. As Karim lay in his hospital bed, the Los Angeles skyline visible through his private room's window, he realized that his accident hadn't just paralyzed his body. It had stripped away the illusions he'd built his life upon. The question now was, could he find the strength to rebuild from the ruins of his shattered dreams? Sarah Mitchell stood before the imposing gates of the Hassan estate, her worn leather bag clutched tightly against her side. At 34, life had taught her that opportunities often came disguised as challenges, and this job interview was no exception. The position of live-in caregiver to Karim Hassan promised a salary that could finally help her manage her daughter Lucy's medical bills, but the rumors about the reclusive millionaire's bitter temperament gave her pause. "Mummy, look at the pretty flowers." 7-year-old Lucy tugged at her hand, pointing to the meticulously maintained garden visible through the iron bars. Sarah hadn't planned to bring her daughter to the interview, but her regular babysitter had cancelled at the last minute. Now, watching Lucy's eyes light up at the sight of the elaborate fountain in the center of the circular driveway, Sarah said a silent prayer that her daughter's presence wouldn't cost her this opportunity. The gates opened silently, and a stern-looking woman in an expensive suit approached them. "Miss Mitchell, I'm Regina Wells, Mr. Hassan's house manager. I wasn't aware you'd be bringing a child." Her disapproving glance at Lucy made Sarah's heart sink. "I apologize for the short notice. My childcare arrangements fell through and—" "Mr. Hassan is very particular about maintaining a quiet environment," Regina interrupted. "Perhaps we should reschedule when you have proper arrangements." Before Sarah could respond, a melodic voice called out from the direction of the mansion. "Oh, let them in, Regina. A little youth around here might do us all some good." A middle-aged woman with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair emerged from the garden. "I'm Mrs. Torres, the housekeeper. You must be Sarah." Regina's lips tightened into a thin line, but she stepped aside. As they walked toward the mansion, Mrs. Torres fell into step beside them. "Don't mind Regina," she whispered. "She's protective of Mr. Hassan, especially since Miss Taylor's last visit." Sarah had read about Madison Taylor's very public departure from Karim Hassan's life. It had been splashed across every tabloid in Los Angeles. The society darling had been photographed at the Cannes Film Festival with an Italian racing driver, barely 2 months after the accident that had left her fiancé paralyzed. The interior of the mansion was a study in contrasts. Priceless Arabic artwork and modern furnishings coexisted in spaces that somehow felt both opulent and unlived in. Their footsteps echoed on marble floors as Regina led them to a sun-filled room that had been converted into a rehabilitation space. Karim Hassan sat in his wheelchair near the window, his back to them. Even from this angle, Sarah could see the proud set of his shoulders, the dignity that emanated from his stillness. "Mr. Hassan, Sarah Mitchell is here for the caregiver position," Regina announced. He turned his wheelchair slowly and Sarah's breath caught. The magazines hadn't done him justice. Despite the shadows under his eyes and the tension in his jaw, Karim Hassan possessed a striking presence. His dark eyes assessed her with an intensity that made her straighten her spine. "You brought a child to a job interview." His voice carried a hint of an accent, his tone more weary than angry. Before Sarah could apologize, Lucy stepped forward. "I'm Lucy." "I'm 7, and I know lots about helping people because I helped my mommy take care of my grandma Annie. She can't see, but she taught me how to play sonnet. It's an ancient Egyptian game, and it's really fun." The ghost of a smile flickered across Karim's face before disappearing. "So your resume says you have experience with spinal cord injuries." "Yes, I worked at Cedars Sinai Rehabilitation Center for 5 years before taking time off to care for my mother," Sarah replied, trying to keep her voice steady under his scrutiny. "And now you need money for your daughter's medical treatment." It wasn't a question. Sarah felt her cheeks flush but held his gaze. "Yes, I do, but that's not the only reason I'm here. I'm good at what I do, Mr. Hassan, and I believe I can help you if you'll let me." Lucy, who had been examining a beautiful Arabic calligraphy piece on the wall, turned back to them. "Mommy always says that sometimes people just need someone to believe in them." Like how she believes in me, even when my legs hurt too much to dance. Something shifted in Karim's expression. A crack in the carefully maintained facade. He studied Lucy for a long moment before returning his attention to Sarah. The position requires living on site. Your daughter would need to stay elsewhere. I understand. I've made arrangements with my mother. No, Lucy interrupted, her small face serious. Grandma Annie said we shouldn't hide who we are or what. We need. Mommy needs this job and I need my mommy. We're a package deal, Mr. Hassan. The room fell silent. Regina looked scandalized. Mrs. Torres fought back a smile, and Sarah felt her heart hammer in her chest. But it was Karim's reaction that surprised them all. He laughed. The sound was rusty, as if long unused but genuine. A package deal, he repeated, shaking his head. Mrs. Torres, prepare the guest house for Ms. Mitchell and her daughter. Regina, draw up the contracts. He turned his wheelchair back toward the window. You start tomorrow, Ms. Mitchell. Don't make me regret this decision. As they followed Mrs. Torres out, Lucy whispered, He has sad eyes, Mommy, like Prince Adam before Belle helped him remember how to be happy. Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand, hoping that this opportunity would indeed help them all find their own version of happily ever after. But as she glanced back at Karim's silhouette against the window, she realized that the journey ahead would require more than just professional skill. It would demand every ounce of patience, compassion, and courage she possessed. The first rays of morning sunlight streamed through the mansion's windows as Sarah helped Karim with his physical therapy exercises. 2 weeks had passed since she'd started working for him, and each day was a careful dance of persistence and patience. Today she noticed his hands trembling slightly as they worked on strengthening his upper body. We should take a break, Sarah suggested, reaching for a towel to wipe the sweat from his brow. You've been pushing yourself hard this morning. I don't need breaks, Karim snapped, his dark eyes flashing with frustration. What I need is for my body to cooperate. He gripped the parallel bars tighter, his knuckles turning white with effort. Sarah stood her ground, already familiar with his stubborn determination. 5 minutes, that's all I'm asking. Time enough for a glass of water and time enough for what? For you to give me another one of your inspirational speeches? His bitter laugh echoed through the rehabilitation room. I've had enough of those from the parade of therapists before you. Before Sarah could respond, Lucy's voice floated in from the garden through the open French doors. She was singing an Arabic lullaby, the words slightly mispronounced but delivered with childish enthusiasm. Karim's expression softened almost imperceptibly. She's been learning that from Mrs. Torres, Sarah explained, noticing his reaction. Apparently it's the same lullaby your mother used to sing to you. How did you? Karim started, then shook his head. Mrs. Torres talks too much. She cares about you. They all do. Sarah pulled up a chair next to his wheelchair. That's why Regina's so protective. Why Mrs. Torres keeps making your favorite childhood dishes. Why even the gardener plants jasmine, because he knows it reminds you of Dubai. Karim remained silent, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. Beginning to ease, she pressed on, sensing a rare moment of receptiveness. You know, my mother always says that strength isn't about refusing help. It's about knowing when to accept it. Your blind mother, Karim said quietly. The one who taught Lucy that Egyptian game. Senet, Sarah nodded. Mum lost her sight when I was 12, but she never lost her way of seeing the world. She taught me that sometimes life's greatest challenges become our greatest teachers. A shadow passed over Karim's face. And what exactly am I supposed to learn from this? He gestured to his legs with a bitter sweep of his hand. How to watch my entire life crumble while wearing designer pajamas. Before Sarah could answer, the sharp click of heels on marble announced Madison's unexpected arrival. She stood in the doorway, as immaculate as ever, in a white designer suit that probably cost more than Sarah's yearly salary. Darling, you didn't return any of my calls. Madison's voice dripped with practiced concern as she moved into the room, pointedly ignoring Sarah's presence. I've been worried sick. Karim's face hardened into an expressionless mask. I've been busy with rehabilitation. Yes, I can see that. Madison's gaze swept dismissively over the exercise equipment, before landing on Sarah. "And who might this be?" "Sarah Mitchell, Mr. Hassan's physical therapist and caregiver," Sarah introduced herself, standing to her full height, despite feeling underdressed in her practical workout clothes. "A caregiver? Oh, darling, you should have called me. I know several excellent rehabilitation centers in Switzerland." Madison moved closer to Karim, her manicured hand coming to rest possessively on his shoulder. "I prefer to recover at home," Karim stated flatly, subtly shifting away from her touch. Madison's perfectly painted lips curved into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Of course, Abibi. Whatever makes you comfortable. I just thought, Daddy! Daddy!" Lucy's voice rang out as she burst into the room, clutching something in her small hands. She stopped short at the sight of Madison, her enthusiasm dimming, slightly. "Lucy," Sarah warned, "what did we say about running in the house?" "Sorry, Mummy," Lucy apologized, but her excitement quickly returned as she approached Karim. "Look what I found in the garden. Mrs. Torres says it's a special stone. That brings good luck." Madison's face tightened with barely concealed disdain. "Darling, since when do you allow children to run wild through your home? And calling you Daddy? Really, this is most inappropriate." "The only thing inappropriate here," Karim said, his voice carrying a steel edge Sarah had never heard before, "is showing up unannounced and criticizing my household decisions." A tense silence fell over the room. Lucy, sensing the atmosphere, stepped closer to Sarah, still clutching her lucky stone. Madison's perfectly composed facade cracked for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger before she smoothed it away, with practiced ease. "I see you need more time," she said coolly, retrieving her designer handbag from where she'd set it. "But remember, darling, some things can't wait forever. The board is asking questions about your return and your father's. Friends in Dubai are concerned about the company's future." As Madison's heels clicked away down the marble hallway, Sarah noticed Karim's hands had begun trembling again, this time not from physical exertion. Lucy, with a child's innocent wisdom, walked over and placed her lucky stone in his palm. "Mrs. Torres says that sometimes good luck doesn't look like what we expect," she said solemnly. "Like how my legs hurting led us to you, and now we're all family." Karim stared at the small, smooth stone in his hand, then at the little girl who had so casually claimed him as family. For the first time since Sarah had met him, she saw something new in his eyes, not just pain or bitterness, but a glimmer of something that looked almost like hope. Madison Taylor's Louboutin heels echoed through the marble halls of her penthouse as she paced, phone pressed to her ear. "Daddy, you don't understand. He's different now. This caregiver and her daughter have somehow gotten into his head." "Maddie, sweetheart," her father's voice carried the weight of concern. "We can't afford to lose this connection to Hassan International. The merger depends on your marriage to Karim. Your mother and I have already leveraged significant assets based on this arrangement." Madison paused before her floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the Los Angeles skyline. "He barely looks at me anymore. And that child, she calls him Daddy, as if she has any right to—" "Then find a way to fix it," her father interrupted sharply. "Whatever it takes. We didn't spend years positioning you as the perfect society wife for you to let it slip away now." After ending the call, Madison sank onto her designer sofa, mind racing. The past few months had been a carefully orchestrated dance, appearing at charity events alone but devoted, giving tearful interviews about standing by her man, all while maintaining a careful distance from the reality of Karim's condition. But now this Sarah Mitchell threatened everything. Across town in the Hassan Mansion's guest house, Sarah sat at her small kitchen table, reviewing Lucy's medical bills. The numbers blurred before her eyes, each one a reminder of the challenging road ahead. Lucy's condition was manageable, but required constant monitoring and expensive treatments. "Mommy!" Lucy appeared in her princess pajamas, clutching her favorite stuffed elephant. "Can we go say goodnight to Mr. Karim? I want to show him the new moves I learned in physical therapy today." Sarah checked her watch. "Sweetie, it's late. Mr. Karim needs his rest and so do you." "But he gets sad at night," Lucy persisted. "I can tell because the lights in his study stay on really late, and Mrs. Torres says he doesn't sleep well anymore." Sarah marveled at her daughter's perceptiveness. Over the past weeks, she'd noticed the same pattern, Karim working late, into the night, as if trying to outrun his thoughts. During their therapy sessions, she often caught him fighting to keep his eyes open. A knock at their door interrupted her thoughts. Mrs. Torres stood there, her usually cheerful face creased with worry. "Sarah, I'm sorry to disturb you so late, but something's not right with the therapy equipment. The mechanism on the parallel bars seems loose, and the resistance settings on the exercise machine have been tampered with." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "What do you mean, tampered with?" "I was cleaning in there after hours, and I noticed, well, it's not the first strange thing I've observed lately. Last week, someone cancelled Mr. Karim's appointment with the specialist without his knowledge, and yesterday, his pain medication went missing for several hours before mysteriously reappearing." Lucy, who had been listening intently, hugged her elephant tighter. "Is someone trying to hurt Mr. Karim?" "No, sweetheart," Sarah assured her, though her own mind was racing. "Sometimes equipment just needs maintenance. Why don't you go pick out a story for bedtime?" Once Lucy was out of earshot, Mrs. Torres lowered her voice. "There's more. Miss Taylor was here this afternoon after you left for Lucy's doctor appointment. She was in the rehabilitation room for quite some time, alone." Sarah remembered the strange tension in the equipment during their evening session, how Karim had struggled more than usual. "Have you told him?" "Mr. Karim has enough burden without adding suspicion to it, but I thought you should know, especially after what happened at your previous position." Sarah's hand instinctively went to her throat, remembering the false accusations of theft that had almost destroyed her career at the rehabilitation center. She'd never proven it, but she'd always suspected one of her wealthy patients' wives had planted evidence after becoming jealous of her husband's progress under Sarah's care. "I'll check all the equipment thoroughly before each session," Sarah promised. "And Mrs. Torres, thank you for telling me." After the housekeeper left, Sarah sat in the quiet kitchen, her mind churning. She'd seen the calculating look in Madison's eyes during their brief encounter, recognized the territorial stance of a woman used to controlling her environment. But would she really go so far as to sabotage Karim's recovery? Through the window, Sarah could see the light still burning in Karim's study. In the weeks she'd worked with him, she'd watched him slowly begin to lower his walls, especially around Lucy. The thought of someone deliberately hindering his progress made her chest tight with anger. Lucy's voice drifted from her bedroom, singing the Arabic lullaby she'd learned. The sound reminded Sarah of her mother's words. "Sometimes protecting someone means being strong enough to face unpleasant truths." Sarah pulled out her phone and began documenting everything Mrs. Torres had told her. She couldn't prove anything yet, but she could be vigilant. Karim Hassan might have built emotional walls to protect himself, but Sarah was beginning to realize she'd built a few of her own, walls that were rapidly crumbling as she found herself caring more deeply about her patient's well-being than any professional handbook would advise. The Hassan mansion's kitchen buzzed with unusual activity as Lucy stood on a step stool, carefully helping Mrs. Torres prepare traditional Arabic cookies. The smell of cardamom and rose water filled the air, bringing a rare smile to Karim's face as he watched from his wheelchair in the doorway. "My mother used to make these every Friday," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. "The whole house would smell like paradise." "Lucy insisted on learning the recipe," Sarah explained, entering the kitchen with a stack of medical reports. "She said they might help you sleep better." The moment was interrupted by Regina's sharp voice from the hallway. "Mr. Hassan, the board members are waiting in your study. They're concerned about your extended absence from the company." Karim's expression hardened instantly. "Tell them I'll be there shortly." He began to wheel himself toward his study, but Sarah noticed his hands shaking slightly on the chair's controls. "Would you like me to—" she started. "I can handle this myself," he cut her off, his voice carrying an edge that had become increasingly rare in recent weeks. The board meeting lasted hours. Through the study's heavy wooden doors, Sarah could hear raised voices discussing profit margins, market shares, and something about a hostile takeover attempt. When the board members finally filed out, their expressions were grim. Sarah found Karim in the garden later that evening, staring at the setting sun. The tension in his shoulders spoke volumes about the meeting's outcome. "Lucy wanted you to have these," she said quietly, placing a small plate of cookies on the table beside him. "She made them especially for you." "Why do you do this?" he asked suddenly, turning to face her. "Why do you and Lucy keep trying to fix me?" "We're not trying to fix you, Karim," she replied, the use of his first name slipping out unconsciously. "We're just trying to be here for you." "Well, don't." His voice cracked slightly. "The board made it quite clear today that sentiment has no place in business. Madison's father is making a play for controlling interest in the company, using my condition as leverage. They think I'm weak, incapable of leading." "You're one of the strongest people I know," Sarah said firmly, "and I've worked with enough patience to know that strength comes in many forms." Karim laughed bitterly. "Strength? I can't even stand on my own. The company my grandfather built, that my father entrusted to me. I'm watching it slip away because I can't walk into a boardroom and command respect like I used to." "Respect isn't earned by how well you walk," Sarah countered, moving to stand in front of him. "It's earned by how well you lead, how you treat others, how you face challenges. And from what I've seen, you haven't lost any of those abilities." Their eyes met, and for a moment the air between them seemed charged with unspoken words. Karim's hand moved slightly, as if to reach for hers, but then Lucy's voice rang out from the kitchen window. "Daddy, Mrs. Torres says you haven't eaten all day. That's against the rules." The moment broke, but something had shifted. Karim picked up one of the cookies, studying it thoughtfully. "These, they taste exactly like my mother's." "Lucy practiced for hours," Sarah smiled. "She has your determination." Later that night, after Lucy was asleep, Sarah received an urgent call from her mother's nurse. "The treatment isn't working as well as we hoped," the nurse explained. "We need to try a new approach, but the cost." Sarah sank into her chair, the weight of multiple responsibilities pressing down on her. Lucy's medical bills were already stretching her savings thin, and now her mother needed additional care. The salary from caring for Karim was generous, but with 2 family members requiring specialized medical attention, it wasn't enough. As she sat in her small living room in the guest house, Sarah could see Karim's study light still burning. Through the window, she watched his silhouette as he worked late into the night, fighting his own battles. She thought about how his eyes had softened when Lucy called him Daddy, how his hands had steadied when she talked about his strength, how he'd finally tasted the cookies that brought back memories of home. A text message lit up her phone. Madison's name appearing on the screen made her heart skip a beat. "I know about your mother's condition. I can help for a price. Meet me tomorrow at the Beverly Hills Hotel. Come alone." Sarah stared at the message, her throat tight. She'd seen the subtle sabotage, recognized the calculated moves Madison had been making. But this was different. This was direct manipulation targeting her family's vulnerabilities. Through the window, she saw Karim finally turning off his study light. In the darkness, Sarah made a decision. She wouldn't meet Madison, wouldn't play into her schemes. Whatever happened, she would find another way. Because in the weeks she'd spent at the Hassan mansion, she'd learned something important. Sometimes the strongest choice isn't fighting alone, but trusting others enough to share your burdens. She picked up her phone and deleted Madison's message. Tomorrow she would focus on helping Karim prepare for his next board meeting, on supporting Lucy through her physical therapy, on finding legal ways to manage her mother's care. One step at a time, just as she'd been teaching Karim. After all, healing, whether physical, emotional, or financial, was never about quick fixes. It was about persistence, patience, and most importantly, maintaining your integrity even when the easier path beckoned. The Beverly Hills Hotel's pristine lobby hummed with quiet activity as James Chen, Karim's former business partner and mentor, made his way toward the Terrace restaurant. He'd been watching the situation at Hassan International unfold from afar, and what he'd seen troubled him deeply. Madison sat at her usual corner table, spreading financial documents before her father. They were so engrossed in their plotting that they didn't notice James taking a seat within earshot, his wheelchair expertly positioned behind a large potted palm. "The board is wavering," Madison's father said, his voice low but triumphant. "Another month of showing Karim's weakness, and they'll be begging for new leadership. Speaking of weakness, Madison replied, that caregiver is becoming a problem. She's making him stronger, more confident. Yesterday, he actually challenged the board's decision about the Dubai expansion. James smiled behind his newspaper. He'd been the one who'd recommended Sarah Mitchell to Mrs. Torres, though he'd kept that information to himself. Having gone through his own journey of rehabilitation years ago, he recognized the rare combination of skill and compassion that Sarah possessed. Back at the Hassan mansion, Sarah was helping Karim with a new series of exercises when Mrs. Torres burst into the rehabilitation room, her face flushed with excitement. "Mr. James is here," she announced, her voice carrying the joy of welcoming an old friend. Karim's expression cycled through surprise, vulnerability, and finally settled on guarded hope as James wheeled himself into the room. The two men studied each other, both successful, both in wheelchairs, but with vastly different attitudes about their circumstances. "Your father called me," James said without preamble. "He's worried about you, Habibi." "My father worries." "Too much," Karim replied stiffly. "I have everything under control." "Really?" James raised an eyebrow, gesturing to the rehabilitation equipment. "Is that why some of this equipment shows signs of tampering? Why your board meetings are suddenly rescheduled without your knowledge? Why Madison's father is meeting with your competitors?" Sarah, who had been quietly gathering her supplies to give them privacy, froze at these words. She'd suspected Madison's involvement in the equipment issues, but hearing it confirmed made her blood boil. "How do you know all this?" Karim demanded. "Because I've been where you are," James replied simply. "Not just the wheelchair, though that's part of it. I've been at the point where pride and pain collide, where trusting others feels like admitting defeat." Lucy chose that moment to skip into the room, carrying her well-worn Senate board. She stopped short at the sight of James, her eyes wide with curiosity. "You have a chair like Daddy's," she exclaimed, then immediately clapped her hands over her mouth, remembering she wasn't supposed to call Karim that in front of others. To everyone's surprise, James laughed warmly. "Yes, I do. And I bet I can. Beat both you and your daddy at Senate. I learned to play in Egypt, you know." The tension in the room dissolved as Lucy eagerly set up the game board. Sarah watched in amazement as James masterfully drew both Lucy and Karim into conversation, sharing stories of his own rehabilitation journey between moves. "The hardest part wasn't learning to live with the wheelchair," James said, as Lucy contemplated her next move. "It was learning to accept that needing help doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." "But the board," Karim started. "The board respects strength," James interrupted. "But they need to see that strength comes in many forms. Show them the man who can adapt, who can lead from any position, who understands that true power isn't in standing tall but in standing firm in your convictions." Sarah noticed tears gathering in Mrs. Torres's eyes as she watched from the doorway. The housekeeper had told her once how she'd prayed for someone to reach Karim, to help him see beyond his injuries. "Your father didn't just build a company," James continued, his voice gentle but firm. "He built a legacy of innovation, of adapting to change, of finding new ways forward when the old paths were blocked. That's what you need to show the board. Not that you can walk into a meeting, but that you can lead the company into the future regardless of how you enter the room." Lucy, who had been listening intently while plotting her game strategy, suddenly moved her piece in an unexpected way. "Checkmate," she announced proudly. "Wrong game, sweetheart," Sarah laughed, "but excellent move nonetheless." The adults chuckled, and Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen in weeks. Karim's laugh reached his eyes, creating tiny crinkles at the corners that transformed his entire face. As the afternoon light filled the room, Sarah realized she was witnessing a turning point. James wasn't just offering business advice, he was showing Karim a vision of his future that didn't require him to choose between strength and vulnerability, between leadership and acceptance, between professional success and personal happiness. Later, as James prepared to leave, he paused beside Sarah. "Keep doing what you're doing," he said quietly. "And watch out for Madison. She's planning something big, something that could hurt all of you." Sarah nodded, her resolve strengthening. She'd protected her patients before, stood firm against attempts to undermine their progress. But this time felt different. This time she wasn't just protecting a patient, she was protecting someone who, despite all his walls and sharp edges, had somehow become essential to her and Lucy's happiness. The boardroom of Hassan International fell silent as Karim's wheelchair glided smoothly to the head of the table. Sarah stood discreetly near the door, there to assist if needed, but careful. To maintain professional distance, this was Karim's moment, his first full board meeting since the accident. "Gentlemen, ladies," Karim began, his voice steady and clear, "I've reviewed the proposals for our Dubai expansion, and I find them lacking in vision." He pressed a button on his tablet, and the room's screens came alive with detailed projections and plans. But Mr. Hassan, Madison's father, Robert Taylor, interrupted from his position near the opposite end of the table. The current market conditions, Karim continued smoothly, are precisely why we need to think bigger. His fingers flew over his tablet, bringing up new slides. "My father built this company on the principle that sustainable energy isn't just about power, it's about empowering communities." Sarah watched with quiet pride as Karim commanded the room. The weeks of preparation with James had paid off. Every gesture was calculated, every word chosen carefully to project strength and vision rather than draw attention to his physical condition. "Our new initiative will partner with local disability organizations in Dubai," Karim announced, earning surprised murmurs from the board members. "We'll create sustainable energy solutions that are accessible to all, while simultaneously developing adaptive technologies that can change lives." The presentation continued, and Sarah could see the shift in the room. Where there had been skepticism, now there was interest. Where there had been doubt, now there was consideration. Even Robert Taylor's attempts to raise objections were met with thoughtful, prepared responses. As the meeting concluded, board members clustered around Karim, asking questions and offering congratulations. Only Madison's father hung back, his face tight with barely concealed anger, as he spoke quietly into his phone. Later that afternoon, Sarah found Karim in the garden, exhausted but triumphant. Lucy was showing him her latest art project, a drawing of what she called their special family, which included Karim front and center. "The board approved all 3 proposals," he told Sarah, his eyes bright with accomplishment. "Even Taylor couldn't find enough objections to block the vote." "I never doubted you," Sarah replied, her heart warming at the sight of Lucy carefully explaining her artwork to Karim. "You just needed to believe in yourself as much as we believe in you." The moment was interrupted by Regina, hurrying across the garden with a concerned expression. "Mr. Hassan, there's an urgent call from the Dubai office, something about unauthorized access to the company's main servers." Karim's expression darkened. "Excuse me," he said, wheeling himself toward his study. Sarah watched him go, noting the confidence in his movements that had been absent just weeks ago. "Mommy," Lucy tugged at her sleeve, "why does the mean lady keep trying to hurt Daddy?" Sarah started, surprised by her daughter's perception. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" "I saw her yesterday when you were at Grandma's. She was in Daddy's study with some man I didn't know looking at his computer." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Lucy, are you sure about this?" "Yes, Mrs. Torres saw them too. She told them they weren't supposed to be there, but the mean lady said she was still his fiancée and had every right." Sarah's mind raced. The server. Breach Madison's unauthorized visit? The timing of it all, it couldn't be coincidence. She needed to tell Karim, but she also knew how delicate the situation was. One wrong move could destroy not only Karim's business, but also the fragile trust they'd built. That evening, as Sarah helped Karim with his evening exercises, she could see the strain of the day in his face. "The server breach," she said carefully. "It wasn't random, was it?" "No," he admitted, his jaw tight. "Someone accessed confidential files about our new adaptive technology patents, files that could give our competitors a significant advantage." Sarah took a deep breath. "Karim, there's something you need to know. Lucy saw Madison in your study yesterday with an unknown man." The color drained from his face. "That's impossible. She doesn't have access anymore. I changed all the codes." After she left you?" Sarah finished gently. But did you change them all? Even the ones you set up when you still trusted her? Karim's hands gripped his wheelchair arms so tightly his knuckles turned white. I was a fool, he whispered. I wanted to believe that despite everything she wouldn't— You weren't a fool, Sarah interrupted firmly. You were someone who loved and trusted. That's never foolish. She knelt beside his chair, meeting his eyes. But now you need to protect yourself, your company, and everything you've worked to rebuild. Their eyes locked, and for a moment, the air between them crackled with unspoken feelings. Karim's hand moved to cover hers where it rested on his wheelchair arm. I don't deserve this, he said softly. Any of it. You, Lucy, this second chance. You deserve everything good in this world, Sarah replied, her voice equally soft. So I just need to be brave enough to claim it. A small sound made them both turn. Lucy stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. I had a bad dream, she said in a small voice. Can I stay with you and Daddy for a while? The moment broke, but something had fundamentally shifted. As Lucy climbed onto Karim's lap, snuggling against him with complete trust, Sarah saw tears glinting in his eyes. We'll figure this out, she promised, squeezing his hand. Together. What none of them noticed was Madison's sleek car pulling away from the mansion's gates, her face illuminated by the glow of her phone as she made one final call. Daddy? It's done. Now we wait. The morning headlines hit like a tsunami. Hassan International faces patent controversy. Inside source reveals stolen technology. Sarah's hands shook as she read the article on her tablet, each word feeling like a physical blow. The story painted Karim as an unethical businessman who had stolen adaptive technology designs from European competitors. Hey, it's all lies, Mrs. Torres said fiercely, setting down a cup of coffee in front of Sarah. Anyone who knows Mr. Karim knows he would never steal anything. Before Sarah could respond, Regina rushed into the kitchen, her usually perfect composure cracking. They're here, reporters, dozens of them. They're at the gates demanding statements about the patent scandal. Sarah moved to the window, watching as news vans lined the street outside the mansion. Through the garden doors, she could see Karim in his study, his figure silhouetted against the morning light as he spoke rapidly on the phone in Arabic. Lucy appeared at her side, her small face worried. Mommy, why are there so many people outside? Are they here to hurt Daddy? No, sweetheart, Sarah assured her, though her own heart was racing. They're just curious about Daddy's work. Why don't you go help Mrs. Torres make some of those special cookies? I think we could all use some comfort food today. As Lucy skipped off to the kitchen, James Chen's wheelchair arrived with unusual urgency. Where is he? He demanded, his normally calm demeanor replaced with fierce determination. Study, Sarah directed him, following close behind. They found Karim ending his call, his face a mask of controlled fury. The patents, he said before either of them could speak. They're claiming I stole them from a Swiss company. But the documentation they're using, it's all fabricated. Someone took our original designs and modified the dates, made it look like we copied their work instead of the other way around. Madison, Sarah said quietly, the server breach, her presence in your study, it all fits. We have no proof, Karim replied, running a hand through his hair in frustration. And now the board is calling an emergency meeting. They want to discuss a change in leadership until this is resolved. James wheeled closer to the desk. You're not alone in this fight, Habibi. I've already called our legal team, and I have contacts in Dubai who can verify the original development timeline of the technology. But will it be enough? Karim's voice carried a weight Sarah had never heard before. The damage to our reputation. A commotion from the front of the house interrupted them. Regina appeared in the doorway, her face pale. Miss Taylor is here. She's talking to the reporters, giving some kind of statement. They rushed to the security monitors, watching as Madison stood before the cameras, playing the role of the concerned fiancé perfectly. I'm heartbroken by these revelations, she was saying, her eyes appropriately tearful. I tried to guide Karim back to the right path after his accident, but he's changed so much. The influence of certain new people in his life has been concerning. Sarah felt her chest tighten as she realized what Madison was doing. Not just attacking Kareem's business integrity, but subtly suggesting that Sarah herself was somehow involved in his supposed downfall. "That's enough." Kareem's voice cut through the tension like steel. "Regina, call security. I want those reporters off my property. James, contact our PR team. It's time we told our side of the story." He turned to Sarah, his eyes softening slightly. "You should take Lucy and go to your mother's for a few days. This is going to get ugly." "No," Sarah said firmly, surprising herself with her vehemence. "We're not going anywhere. Lucy and I are part of this family now, whether you like it or not. And we don't abandon family when things get tough." A ghost of a smile touched Kareem's lips. "You're as stubborn as my mother was." "Speaking of mothers," James interrupted, his eyes suddenly bright with an idea. "Kareem, didn't your mother keep detailed journals about the company's early days, including the initial development phases of all your major projects?" "Yes, but they're in Dubai in my father's private library." "Then it's time to make some calls home," James said firmly. "Madison may have technology and timing on her side, but she's forgotten one crucial thing. The Hassan family never throws anything away, especially not proof of their innovations." As they began formulating their strategy, Sarah slipped away to check on Lucy. She found her in the kitchen with Mrs. Torres, carefully decorating cookies with Arabic designs. "These are special protection cookies," Lucy explained seriously. "Grandma Annie says that when you make food with love, it has special powers. These will help Daddy be strong." Sarah pulled her daughter close, marveling at her innocent wisdom. Through the kitchen window, she could still see the reporters at the gates, could hear the distant sound of their questions and cameras. But here in the warmth of the kitchen, watching Lucy carefully pipe designs onto cookies meant to protect the man they'd both come to love, Sarah felt a fierce determination rise within her. Madison might have money, influence, and a carefully crafted plan, but she had overlooked something essential: the power of a family bound not by blood or business, but by love and choice. As Sarah helped Lucy with her cookies, she silently promised herself and Kareem that they would weather this storm together, emerging stronger on the other side. The private library in Dubai was exactly as Kareem remembered it. Walls lined with leather-bound books, the scent of aged paper and wisdom lingering in the air. His father stood beside his wheelchair, holding a dusty journal with careful reverence. "Your mother," Hassan Sr. said softly, "she documented everything, every idea, every innovation, every step of the company's growth." He placed the journal in Kareem's hands. "She always said our greatest strength was in remembering where we came from." Back in Los Angeles, Sarah paced the mansion's living room, watching the video call on the large screen. Lucy sat cross-legged on the floor, working on a new art project. This time, a carefully drawn family tree that included everyone in the household, with Kareem and his parents prominently featured at the top. "The original sketches are all here," Kareem's voice came through the speakers, excitement breaking through his usual reserve. "Mother dated every entry, had witnesses sign each page. She even kept fabric samples from our first solar-powered textile experiments." "That's wonderful," Sarah breathed, relief flooding through her. "But will it be enough to convince the board?" "More than enough," James interjected from his position near the screen. "These journals are legally certified documents. The dates and signatures are irrefutable proof that our technology was developed years before the Swiss company even existed." Mrs. Torres entered with a tray of fresh mint tea, her eyes glistening as she watched Kareem on the screen. "You look just like your mother when you smile like that," she said softly. "She would be so proud of you now." Kareem's face softened at her words. She would have loved all of this, wouldn't she? The chaos, the drama. His eyes met Sarah's through the screen. "The way family can find you when you least expect it." The moment was interrupted by Regina rushing in. "Mr. Hassan, the PR team needs an immediate decision. The Swiss company is offering to hold a joint press conference tomorrow. They claim they want to clear the air about the patent situation." "It's a trap," James said immediately. "They'll try to pressure you into a public compromise that makes you look guilty." "No," Kareem replied, his voice firm. "It's an opportunity. Father, Would you be willing to fly to Los Angeles tonight? I think it's time we showed the world what the Hassan family is really made of. As preparations began for the next day's press conference, Sarah found herself helping Lucy pack an overnight bag. "Are you sure you'll be okay at Grandma Annie's tonight?" she asked, watching her daughter carefully fold her favorite pajamas. "Yes, Mummy. Grandma Annie says sometimes grown-ups need space to fight their battles." Lucy looked up, her eyes serious. "But Daddy will win, right? Because he has the truth, and you always say the truth is stronger than lies." Sarah pulled her daughter close, marveling at her wisdom. "Yes, sweetheart. The truth is always stronger." Later that evening, as the mansion buzzed with activity, PR teams strategizing, legal advisors reviewing documents, staff preparing for the arrival of Hassan Sr., Sarah found Karim in the garden, staring at the stars. "My mother loved this time of night," he said without turning around. "She said it was when the world was quiet enough to hear your heart speak." Sarah moved to stand beside his wheelchair. "What is your heart saying tonight?" "That I've been a fool in so many ways," he replied softly. "I spent months hiding in this house, bitter about what I'd lost, when I should have been grateful for what I was being given." He turned to look at her, his eyes intense in the moonlight. "Sarah, after tomorrow, regardless of how things turn out with the company, there's something I need to tell you." "Tell me now," she whispered, her heart pounding. "Now isn't the time," he said, though his hand found hers in the darkness. "First we fight this battle, then we talk about beginnings." From the kitchen window, Mrs. Torres watched them with a knowing smile as she prepared a late-night meal for the arriving guests. Beside her, Lucy's family tree drawing sat proudly displayed on the refrigerator, its branches spreading wide and strong, just like the love that had grown in this house despite every attempt to uproot it. In her hotel suite across town, Madison paced nervously, watching her father argue with their lawyers. The news of Hassan Sr.'s imminent arrival had thrown their carefully laid plans into chaos. She picked up her phone, staring at the last text, a message she'd sent to Sarah, the threat that had gone unanswered. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Had she underestimated not just Karim's strength, but the power of the family he'd built around him? The night deepened. Stars wheeling overhead as Los Angeles prepared for sleep. But in the Hassan mansion, lights burned bright as a family, bound not by blood but by choice, not by tradition but by love, prepared for the battle that would define their future. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight, in the quiet garden where truth and love had taken root, hope bloomed as eternal as the stars above. The Beverly Wilshire Hotel's grand ballroom hummed with tension as journalists and business leaders filled the rows of seats. At the back of the stage, hidden from view, Sarah helped Karim adjust his tie, her fingers lingering perhaps a moment longer than necessary. "Remember," she said softly, "you're not just fighting for the company today. You're fighting for your mother's legacy, for your father's trust, for everything your family has built." Hassan Sr. approached them, his distinguished presence commanding respect even in casual observation. "Are you ready, my son?" Karim glanced at the wheelchair ramp leading to the podium, then at his father. I want to try something different," he turned to Sarah. "The exercises we've been practicing, the parallel bars, I think it's time." Sarah's eyes widened with understanding. "Are you sure? We've only managed a few steps in therapy, and with all these people." "Sometimes," Karim said, a familiar determination settling over his features, "you have to stand up for what you believe in, literally." As the press conference began, Madison and her father sat in the front row, their confident smirks fading as Hassan Sr. took the stage first. The elder Hassan's voice filled the room with authority as he spoke of his late wife's dedication to documentation, her meticulous recording of every company innovation. "But perhaps," Hassan Sr. concluded, "it is not my words you need to hear. My son will show you not just the truth of our company's innovations, but the spirit of innovation itself." The room fell silent as Karim's wheelchair appeared at the side. Of the stage, James Chen, positioned nearby, gave an encouraging nod. What happened next caused an audible gasp from the assembled crowd. With Sarah and his father providing subtle support, Karim rose from his wheelchair. Step by painstaking step, he made his way to the podium, each movement a testament to months of determination and hard work. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady despite the effort of standing, "innovation isn't just about technology. It's about resilience, about finding new ways forward when the old paths are blocked." He opened his mother's journal, its pages carefully marked. "These records show the development of our adaptive technology patents, dating back 5 years. But they show something else too. Something my mother understood that others might have forgotten." From her seat in the audience, Madison watched in growing horror as Karim methodically dismantled every accusation against him. The dated entries, the witness signatures, the original sketches, all provided irrefutable proof of Hassan International's claim to the technology. "But this press conference isn't just about clearing our company's name," Karim continued, his strength visibly waning but his voice growing stronger. "It's about announcing a new initiative." He gestured and photographs appeared on the screens behind him. Children in hospitals, rehabilitation centers, schools. Using our adaptive technology patents, Hassan International is launching the Amira Foundation, named after my mother. We will provide accessible, sustainable energy solutions and adaptive technology to communities in need around the world. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she watched from the side of the stage. This was the man she'd always known was there, beneath the layers of pain and bitterness, a leader who could turn personal challenges into opportunities to help others. "This foundation," Karim announced, "will be led by someone who understands both the challenges and the possibilities of adaptive technology. Someone who has shown me that true strength lies not in standing alone, but in lifting others up." He turned slightly, extending his hand. "Sarah Mitchell, would you do us the honor of becoming the Foundation's first director?" The gasp that went through the crowd was nothing compared to the shock Sarah felt. She moved forward automatically, taking Karim's outstretched hand, feeling the tremors of exertion in his fingers. "Together," he said, both to her and to the crowd, "we will build something my mother always dreamed of, a world where innovation serves humanity, where challenges become opportunities, and where no one has to face their battles alone." Madison stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. As she turned to leave, she found her path blocked by James Chen's wheelchair. "You might want to stay," he said quietly. "The Securities and Exchange Commission representatives are very interested in discussing certain unauthorized access to company servers and manipulation of corporate documents." The press conference ended with thunderous applause. As medical personnel helped Karim back to his wheelchair, his father embraced him with tears in his eyes. "Your mother would be so proud," Hassan Sr. whispered, "not just of what you've accomplished, but of who you've become." Later that evening, as the mansion filled with celebration, Sarah found Karim in their spot in the garden. Lucy was curled up asleep in his lap, clutching her latest drawing, a picture of Karim standing at the podium with Sarah and their entire extended family supporting him. "Did you mean it?" Sarah asked softly. "About the foundation?" "I meant everything," he replied, taking her hand. "The foundation, the future, us, if you'll have me." Their moment was interrupted by Mrs. Torres calling from the kitchen. "The celebration dinner is ready, and Lucy's special cookies for dessert." As they made their way inside, Sarah realized that sometimes the greatest victories aren't the ones you plan for, but the ones that grow naturally from love, trust, and the courage to stand up, in every sense of the word, for what you believe. In the Hassan mansion buzzed with excited energy as preparations for the Amira Foundation's inaugural gala reached their final stages. In the newly renovated East Wing, now converted into the Foundation's headquarters, Sarah stood before a mirror, adjusting the hijab Mrs. Torres had helped her wrap, a gesture of respect for the cultural celebration ahead. "You look beautiful, Mommy," Lucy exclaimed from her perch on a nearby chair, already dressed in her own traditional Arabic outfit, specially made for the occasion, just like a princess from Daddy's stories. Sarah smiled at her daughter's reflection, marveling at how naturally Lucy had embraced their new family's traditions. The past 3 months since the press conference had brought changes none of them could have imagined. Madison's father had resigned from the board after the SEC investigation. The company's stock had soared following the announcement of the Amira Foundation. And most importantly, their makeshift family had grown stronger with each passing day. A knock at the door revealed Mrs. Torres, her eyes glistening. "Mr. Hassan asks if you're ready. The first guests will be arriving soon, and he wants to practice the traditional entrance one more time." In the mansion's grand foyer, Karim waited, with his father. Though still in his wheelchair for longer periods, his daily therapy had progressed to where he could now walk short distances with minimal support. Tonight, he planned to welcome guests standing at the entrance, a symbol of both personal and professional triumph. "The board members are already talking about international expansion for the foundation," Hassan Sr. was saying. "Your mother would have loved seeing her dream grow like this." "She would have loved seeing all of it," Karim replied, his eyes finding Sarah as she entered the foyer. For a moment, he forgot to breathe. The deep blue hijab brought out the warmth in her eyes, and the traditional dress she wore seemed to transform her into something out of his childhood stories, the ones his mother used to tell about love that could transform worlds. Lucy ran to him immediately, climbing onto his lap with practiced ease. "Look, Daddy, Mrs. Torres made us match." She pointed to the similar patterns on their outfits, her face beaming with pride. "Perfect for our special surprise later," he whispered to her, sharing a conspiratorial wink that made her giggle. The evening unfolded like a dream. Hundreds of guests filled the mansion's grounds, where traditional Arabic music mixed with contemporary sounds. Children from the Foundation's first partner hospital played games on the lawn, their adaptive devices incorporating the very technology that had caused so much controversy months ago. James Chen moved through the crowd, proudly showing potential. Donors the prototype for a new solar-powered wheelchair design. "Completely sustainable," he explained, "and thanks to the Amira Foundation, available to those who need it most." Sarah found herself drawn into conversations with healthcare providers, government officials, and families of children with disabilities. Each interaction reinforced what she'd always believed, that compassion combined with innovation could change lives. As the evening reached its peak, Karim rose from his wheelchair near the garden fountain, drawing everyone's attention. The music softened, and the crowd gathered closer. "Tonight," he began, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering, "we celebrate not just the launch of the Amira Foundation, but the power of transformation. My mother believed that true innovation comes from the heart, from understanding what people really need to thrive." He gestured to the children playing nearby. "These children represent our future, a future where disability doesn't mean limitation, where challenges become opportunities, and where love breaks down every barrier." Lucy suddenly appeared at his side, holding a small decorative box. The crowd murmured in appreciation as she carefully opened it, revealing what appeared to be an ancient game piece. "This," Karim continued, taking the piece from the box, "is from the first Senet game my mother taught me to play. She said that life, like Senet, is about making brave moves when the time is right." He turned to Sarah, who stood frozen in place. Sarah's understanding dawned on her face. With practiced movements, he took 3 steps toward her, steady and sure. "Sarah Mitchell," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you came into my life when I was lost in darkness. You and Lucy showed me that family isn't about perfect circumstances. It's about perfect love. You taught me to stand again, not just physically, but as a man, as a leader, as someone worthy of the legacy my parents built." The entire gathering held its breath as Karim, still standing, reached for Sarah's hand. "In our tradition, we believe that love is a gift from Allah, meant to be cherished and celebrated. Would you do me the honor of celebrating it with me officially as my wife?" Lucy bounced excitedly beside them, clearly in on the plan all along. The ancient game piece in Karim's hand was revealed to be holding a striking ring, its design incorporating elements of both their cultures. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she found her voice. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes!" The crowd erupted in celebration as Karim slipped the ring onto her finger. Lucy threw her arms around both of them, creating a family embrace that represented everything the evening was truly about: love, healing, and the power of new beginnings. From the back of the crowd, Mrs. Torres dabbed at her eyes with her apron, while Hassan Sr. stood tall and proud, seeing in his son's joy a reflection of his own love story with Amira years ago. Even Regina, usually so reserved, couldn't hide her smile as traditional wedding blessings began to fill the air, sung spontaneously by the gathered guests. Sarah and Karim held each other close, their family complete, their future bright with promise. The garden fountain sparkled behind them, its waters singing an ancient song of love's power to heal, transform, and create miracles from life's greatest challenges. The traditional Arabic wedding celebration transformed the Hassan Mansion's gardens into a scene from a fairy tale. Thousands of twinkling lights draped the trees, their glow reflecting off the fountain where, months ago, a little girl's lucky stone had first sparked hope in a wounded heart. Sarah stood in what was once the guest house, now her and Lucy's permanent home until the wedding, allowing Mrs. Torres and a team of traditional dressmakers to make final adjustments to her wedding gown. The dress combined elements of both Western and Arabic design, just as their ceremony would blend both cultures into something uniquely their own. "Something old," Mrs. Torres said, carefully pinning a delicate veil in place, one that had belonged to Karim's mother. "Amira wore this at her own wedding. She would have wanted you to have it." Lucy twirled nearby in her flower girl dress, practicing her steps for the ceremony. "Daddy said this is just like the story of the princess who helped the king remember how to smile," she said, beaming, "except better because it's real." A knock at the door revealed Hassan Sr., his eyes misting as he took in the sight of Sarah in his late wife's veil. "Amira always said that love had a way of completing circles. We didn't even know we were drawing," he said softly. "She knew somehow that Karim would need someone like you, someone with the strength to love not just with their heart, but with their soul." The ceremony itself was a testament to the healing power of love. Karim, standing proudly with the support of a beautifully carved wooden cane, a wedding gift from James Chen, watched as Lucy preceded Sarah down the aisle, scattering rose petals and beaming at every guest. When Sarah appeared, a vision in her fusion gown and Amira's veil, Karim felt his heart stop. This was more than a wedding. It was the culmination of a journey that had begun with tragedy, but had transformed into something beautiful, beyond imagination. The traditional prayers and modern vows blended seamlessly, creating a ceremony that honored both their pasts and their future. Lucy insisted on being the one to hand them their rings, her small face serious with the responsibility. "With this ring," Karim said in Arabic, then English, "I pledge not just my love, but my partnership. You showed me that our greatest strengths often come from our greatest challenges." Sarah's voice trembled slightly as she responded, "With this ring, I promise to stand with you through all of life's seasons, celebrating our victories and facing our challenges together." Lucy tugged at the officiant's robes. "Can I say something too?" When he nodded, she stepped forward proudly. "I promise to be the best daughter ever, and to always help Daddy remember to do his exercises." Laughter and tears mingled among the guests as the new family shared their first embrace as official unit. From their seats of honor, Mrs. Torres and Regina exchanged knowing looks. They had watched this love story unfold from the beginning, had seen hope bloom in the darkest times. The reception that followed was a joyous blend of cultures and celebrations. Traditional Arabic music gave way to contemporary songs as guests danced under the stars. The children from the Amira Foundation's programs had a special performance, demonstrating their adaptive dance techniques in a routine that brought the crowd to their feet. James Chen raised his glass in a toast. "To love that breaks down barriers, to family that transcends blood, and to the power of believing in second chances." As the evening drew to a close, Karim and Sarah found a quiet moment by their fountain. Lucy had fallen asleep in Hassan Sr.'s lap, clutching her flower girl basket even in dreams. "Do you remember the first time we sat here?" Sarah asked, leaning into her new husband's embrace. "You were so angry at the world, so sure that your life was over. And you were so stubborn, Karim chuckled, pulling her closer. You and Lucy, with your cookies and your games, and your absolute refusal to let me give up. We make quite a team, Sarah smiled, watching as the foundation's new logo, a stylized rising sun, was projected onto the mansion's facade. All of us. More than a team, Karim corrected softly. A family. One that proves every day that love has no limits, no boundaries, no conditions. Inside the mansion, the staff began preparing for the couple's departure to Dubai for their honeymoon, a journey that would combine foundation business with pleasure as they planned to visit several potential new program sites. Lucy would join them after a week, bringing Hassan Sr. with her for an extended family vacation. But for now, in this perfect moment beneath the stars, Karim and Sarah held each other close, their love story a testament to the truth that sometimes life's greatest challenges lead us exactly where we need to be. Their journey had begun with a tragic accident, but had blossomed into something beautiful, a love that had not only healed wounds, but had created a legacy of hope for others. As the last guest departed, Lucy stirred in her grandfather's arms, blinking sleepily at her parents. "See," she murmured, "I told you fairy tales can come true." And in the garden of the Hassan mansion, where a little girl's faith had helped spark a miracle of love, no one could argue with that wisdom. For their story had proven that true love knows no boundaries, that family is about choice as much as blood, and that the greatest happiness often comes not despite our challenges, but because of how we face them together.